Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by Old School Lane, producing various content from blogs, videos, and podcasts discussing about movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else in between since 2011. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Overcast, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. We're associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia and I am here with a very special guest. I am here with Johnny, the guy behind Operation Head Pigeons. So yeah, today we are going to be talking about Invader ZIM. As of the recording of this podcast, it's going to be celebrating its 20th anniversary. So yeah, I guess I have talked about Invader ZIM a handful of times on Old School Lane. I did a From Pilot to Final Product on Invader ZIM. I did Invader ZIM Enter the Florpus with my co-host Remington Keys from the Nerd Talk podcast. So yeah, we have talked a few times about Invader ZIM. So yeah, right before we discuss about the show, how did you first learn about it?
I first learned about the show just from them actually marketing it decently 20 years ago. I was a fan since the very first weekend it aired. And I remember the first time I watched it was the first weekend it aired. And first I was channel hopping on the actual night it debuted. I was at my father's and I remember distinctly sitting in a chair, channel hopping from Disney, then to Nickelodeon, and Dib emerges from the school entrance and just goes, Zim! And I remember going, well, this doesn't look good, and changing it. 2 days later, I gave it a much fairer shake. The thing about Invader ZIM is you have to start from the beginning and sit through it and let it have a chance to get your attention, especially when you're Nickelodeon's target demographic. It's has a very complicated animation style for the time, and it was a very expensive animation style, and children weren't used to that back in 2001. So when you have moments of dramatic tension that are supposed to build up to a joke, so Dib emerging from the school entrance after all the silliness that happened, it was supposed to build up to that juxtaposition, and me channel hopping wasn't giving it a fair shot. And then 2 days later, April 1st, 2001, WrestleMania 17 night, I'll never forget it. That was when I became a fan. I watched from the beginning all the way through the end, and I was enthralled. The entire opening segment feels like a movie, as any Invader ZIM fan will attest to. I remember when the episode ended, I was like 9 years old at the time, and I ran to the kitchen to tell my family about how awesome it was. I also remember mistaking Zim to be a woman at the time.
Yeah, as for me, I watched it on the first night because I was just so intrigued with it. My sister and we saw the first episode and we immediately fell in love with it. I mean, my sister, not so much now, because she feels that, it's kind of like a little bit more immature, which what her taste was. But as for me, like, I already was gravitating to it. I just thought it was like really different yet really fascinating. I just felt that Nickelodeon, when it came to like sci-fi series, it never really like hit a home run. The Space Cases was a show that came out in 1996, only lasted for like 2.5 seasons before it got canceled, and then they tried to remake the Tomorrow People in the 90s, and Journey of Alan Strange would have probably been like the closest thing to like a successful sci-fi show, even though that the kid is an alien and it takes place on Earth. But yeah, like none of the sci-fi stuff on Nickelodeon really intrigued me. And so when I first saw the trailer for it, I was like, wow, this looks something completely different. Now, when the show came out, I was like 14 years old. So it's like I was already in high school, and I actually started meeting up a lot of students who actually read through some of Jonan Vasquez's early works, like John the Homicidal Maniac. And so they showed it to me like around the same time in which when Invader Zim was like getting really popular. It's like, oh, this is the stuff that the same guy who did this show also did these books. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, I mean, that's really dark. But at the same time, I can recognize the art style. And so in high school, Invader Zim was super popular. Everybody was getting into it. I was hanging around with like the MTV, Toonami crazed fans in which like they were really into anime, or they were really into like these really dark, gothic aesthetic shows. And I was really getting into the show as well. I think I remember that Hot Topic was like a big commotion at the time, where people were starting to just see like Invader Zim stuff everywhere. And so yeah, like around my high school years, Invader Zim was just like taking over the world. And then after a while, when the show ended, I saw from like my college friends that they still love the show, and that even the fandom was like consistently growing. I didn't really know too much about like people who did like InvaderCom and all of the other fan bases online, because at the time I was like really busy with like college work. And then after a few years, I didn't really go into the internet as much because I was trying to focus on trying to find a job, because it was during the Great Recession, until I started posting out my content on Old School Lane, where I started learning more about like fandoms and such like that. But yeah, I had never really left Invader Zim. I still kind of carried it around with me a little bit, because it was just something like really different, really unique, especially with all the other cartoons that came out around the time for Nickelodeon. You had your Fairly Odd Parents, your My Life as a Teenage Robot, Chalk Zone, Danny Phantom. So it was like it stood out amongst the crowd. And even with like all the other stuff that was coming out, it just was like a major different show that I just really just gravitated to. So yeah, I guess we'll now talk about like some of your favorite characters, moments, or episodes. So what would you say are some of your favorites?
I'm glad you asked, but also I'm happy to build upon what you said as well. I think it's terrific that there was a strong audience for Zim in the high school crowd, and I'm really glad to hear that, because, like, as I said earlier, I was 9 and turning 10 within weeks when it came out. So for me, I was in middle school, and I was one of the more misfit types in my class. Like, I had friends, but if Johnny was into it, that usually means it wasn't likely to be cool to the other kids. And I remember reading online how often Invader Zim was hitting really well with the high school and college crowd, but a lot less so with the target demographic. So hearing you tell me about during the original run, and you had all these peers that you could talk about Zim with, that's really special. And I wish Nickelodeon was prepared for that, because originally Jonan had said in a couple of interviews that what sold him on working with them was he'd be doing a show for a block of edgy programming, and that block didn't pan out, and Zim was 9 o'clock Eastern Friday nights, and it was hard for them to find an appropriate slot without it being a chasm of death that scares away the kids when they get from Rocket Power to Fairly Odd Parents. So, but you asked about the favorite characters and episodes and such. My all-time favorite character for the rest of eternity is Tack. By proxy, that means Tack the Hideous New Girl is my favorite episode. Tack has this ensemble dark horse feel to her, where she only has one episode canonically. Then her Black Mirror-esque artificial intelligence copy is in season 2 in the film and the comics. But Tack proper's only in that one episode, yet we all treat her like she's a mainstay character in the fan fiction, the fan art. The sheer demand to get her voice actress at InvaderCon was evident as well. You could tell she's really special. And for me, what made her special was that so often villains in Invader Zim really serve the joke more than the coolness factor. It seems to me, and I can't really cite the evidence off the top of my head, that if it's cool but it's not funny, then it usually gets cut out from Zim. There's an entire animated segment in Abducted that was cut because it was cool but not funny. Well, animated segments will have some ADR just to make sure that every moment has some good humor in it, or at least build up to a joke. And there's only a couple of villains I can think of in Zim that serve coolness just as much as the joke. And first, I think over the years, I thought the Planet Jackers were all cool with a lot less joke, but they were an homage to Fargo. But Tack's the one where even where she's funny, there's a badassery to her. People wanted to be her at conventions. People wanted to draw and write cool scenarios involving her. And I think that taps in a little bit to Johnny the Homicidal Maniac fandom. The official pose art she was given, it's reminiscent of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac's pose in the retail cover for issue 1. Her clothes is reminiscent of him, but with more of a purple-black aesthetic. You could tell she's hyped up to be something really special. But also sentimentally, about 10 years into my fandom where I was having this nostalgia trip in college and I hear that Zim almost came back in 2010 and I was like, I should rewatch the show, and I went on Facebook and because people liked Facebook back then and I was just wanting to find other fellow fans and answer a little sentiment on my mind. Do we all agree? Tack is our Boba Fett. Just by that whim, I had joined Operation Head Pigeons, the movement, and then I had risen up the ranks, earned the trust of my co-admin, and became CBJohnny, so to speak.
Wow. And all from just a character who only appeared in one episode.
Yeah, she's got such a butterfly effect on my life, and when you put it that way, all it takes is one episode to really make an impact on somebody.
Oh yeah, sure. I think that it's really hard to say about like favorite characters per se because you go with the stereotypical ones. It's like, oh, Gur is my favorite or Gaz is my favorite. That's really hard to say. But I mean, if I had to choose like a character that I really do root for, I root for Dib a lot because being the awkward kid and trying to tell everybody that these aliens exist and nobody believes him and he tries to prove everybody wrong. I do kind of relate to that, in which, like, I sometimes feel like I'm overlooked with a lot of people, and I try to prove that, I can, do something, even though that some people say that I can't. It's kind of like a personal history with me when, dating back for as far as I can remember. But, yeah, I mean, like, Gaz is a great character, too, and so is Gur. If I had to choose favorite episodes, that's really hard, because there's a lot of episodes that I really do like. Battle of the Planets is one of my favorites, as well as Planet Jackers. I always do like the balance between the cool and the funny. I think that you pretty much cemented that perfectly, in which, like, if Zim is leaning more towards one or the other. I mean, they do lean a lot of, like, humor as well, but I always like the ones that balance out the cool with the funny. I feel that that's when the writing is at top notch, in which they can have a lot of action moments, but then there's a lot of funny moments which can make you laugh.
I really appreciate that because the thing about Invader Zim is I don't know if they ever set out to inspire people, and I know Nickelodeon is big on making sure kids feel like there's relatability in characters. And if I understood the crew correctly, they seem to have an attitude of relatability usually entailing parent-teacher conferences, not getting your homework done on time, stuff like that. But to have something a little deeper, such as someone who, like Dib, who's not taken seriously, and you still found relatability in that, I think the crew would appreciate hearing that. And I think it shows that they really knew what they were doing, pushing for stories that were a little unusual for Nickelodeon at the time, and they had trust that young people would really go for what they were going with.
Sure. And that's not to say that this is the first time that Nickelodeon really dealt with a show that had weird stories. I mean, Ren and Stimpy did that, Angry Beavers did that, The Adventures of Pete and Pete did that, Rocko's Modern Life did that, and I guess to some weird extent, SpongeBob did that. But Invader Zim took it in a different direction, where it felt like it would be a show that would have aired in MTV during the early 90s with, like, Liquid Television or The Max or Beavis and Butthead, in which, like, it's like definitely leaning more towards like the teenager adult side as opposed to the kid side. And I think that the appeal of Zim, it's like, I guess it would be like the appeal of like one of those shows if they were to watch it as like a young kid. It's like, it's a show that I shouldn't be watching because I'm not old enough, but I'm just so intrigued with it that I still want to watch it anyway. And yeah, it's really weird. It's very random. And it can go into dark humor a lot of the times. And also, the animation style is like really like breathtaking and unique, especially if you watch it on like a widescreen TV and you see like the neon colors and the backgrounds. I mean, they still hold up. I mean, if you look back on like older shows in which, they have like very simple basic backgrounds, in which like Invader ZIM was super elaborate. Like you can definitely tell with like each of the details with the lines and the placement of the buildings and the way that the ships are designed is just really intricate. And I know that Joan and Vasquez made the joke about like the episode with the moose, in which like they were talking about like it was like the most expensive walnuts that they could be able to draw in, and Nickelodeon was like charging them for the walnuts, which I thought that was funny. By the way, it's like, oh yes, we need to be careful about our budget because we don't want to overspend it with these intricate, detailed walnuts. But no, I thought that was really appreciative, and I know that it inspired a lot of creativity with the art style, and also the fact that I think that with people who are just watching it for the first time, I guess it's kind of like one of those shows that you watch on like a college room, and you see like you have a group of people together, and then you talk about it. It's like you have this kids show that is airing on Nickelodeon, the same channel that has SpongeBob and the Fairly Odd Parents, and then you have this weird show, and it's like, man, like it's so different. And I mean, I would have loved to have been in college when that would have happened, because I'm sure that would have been like the talk of the town. When I read Sick Little Monkeys, the unauthorized Ren and Stimpy story by Thad Komorowski, when he talked about how college students would gather together to watch Ren and Stimpy, and they would just like talk about it to death. And the same thing probably would have happened with Invader Zim. It's like, I wish I would have been there, because that would have been super awesome. And the whole relatability thing, I'm glad that you brought that up, because that would have been around the time in which when Nickelodeon was starting to focus more on its slice of life stories, like Rugrats, Doug, Hey Arnold, Rocket Power, and As Told by Ginger. That probably would have been the show that at the time that would have been like the most recent in terms of their slice of life stories, where they have this relatability, kids going to school and going through everyday situations. But here it's done like really differently. Oh, you have one episode about a parent teacher conference, that's pretty normal. Oh no, the parents are robots and they just go berserk. Or we have this one episode where somebody brings in a pet, it's a giant hamster that's about to destroy the city. So yeah, they actually have this relatability and this realism to kind of cushion up the blow of just, oh, this is weird. There's an alien here trying to take over, but he's the most incompetent alien possible. There's this robot that disguises himself as a dog. There's this conspiracy nut kid with his goth sister and science father. It's like, yeah, if you were to say at face value, it sounds really, really weird, but there's an appeal to it that is actually easy for some to get into. I can understand it won't be for a lot of people, because they just see like, oh, random humor, lulz. But I can see, for people who wanted to deviate all the stuff that Nickelodeon was known for, and then they'll be like, wow, this is different. I think I can understand where the appeal came from.
I hear you there. Two thoughts came to mind is I'm going to shamelessly plug his book. Eric Trueheart has the Invader Zim script book. It's unofficial, but it's as close to as official as one could get. And there's a part in his book where he talks about how Rugrats had been an unexpected hit. And I'm paraphrasing heavily because I didn't prepare to write that trivia down, but that may have been the reason that Nickelodeon was going for the direction they were going in terms of what makes a successful show, and they kept borrowing from that Rugrats formula a little bit.
It does make a lot of sense, considering that Rugrats would have been the big hit around 2001. SpongeBob was still probably in like its second or third season, so it didn't hit that stride yet. I had Paul Germain on my show, the guy who co-created the first 3 seasons of Rugrats, and he talked about a similar situation where he didn't expect the show to be as big of a hit as it was, because Ren and Stimpy took over the world. And yeah, I mean, it was a surprise that when they aired the reruns as soon as Rugrats ended its 65 episode run, and then finally when they released the Hanukkah special and the Passover special, it was like, wow, where did this success come from? So I take it that Nickelodeon, when they found their first cash cow, that they need to be able to say, try to see if they can strike lightning in a bottle twice. Let's try all these other shows. Let's try Cat Dog. Let's see if that can work out. Let's try Angry Beavers. Let's see if that works out. Let's try SpongeBob. Let's see if that works out. And so, yeah, I mean, I can understand them trying to say, hey, we have this really strange concept about babies. Let's try this other strange concept and let's see how that works out.
Another thing that couldn't help but reflect upon as you were talking, and there is an undeniable reaction to a certain types of jokes in Zim that is very easy to refer to as random, to the point where etymologically the word random seems to be losing its meaning or having new meaning, the way the word meme has went from information passed down from generation to generation to internet inside joke to pictures with words that are funny. And random seems to have, thanks to shows like Family Guy, which predates Zim, we seem to attribute randomness as a synonym of weirdness. And for years, I was like, guys, Invader Zim isn't random. Every joke had purpose and structure to it. Come on, guys. But after a while, etymologically, I just go, random is just a new fancy word for weird, and weird is the word for when we don't want to understand things, but we still enjoy it.
I love that analogy, by the way, because, yeah, you're right. Because when you think of something random, you immediately think of something weird. When random is like unexpected, you would think that, oh, you have this moment in which you just didn't expect it. You would say that that was random or it didn't have the context. That's the proper thing that you need to remember. Random means there's no context. But with Zim, there is a context. It's like, oh, why are the robots acting like this? Well, there's a context because there's a lot of bugs and issues. Why is Gur acting like this? Well, here's the context because he wasn't programmed correctly. So, yeah, there's a lot of context as to why these characters act the way that they do.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I'm not sure how much you were aware or your audience was aware of the whole Invader Zim revival efforts in 2010, but see, usually I just like send citable evidence, so remind me later. I will pull up the articles and the blog posts. But back in 2010, March 2010, Jonan had, in case this isn't apparent to anybody who's listening, Jonan, referring to the series creator Jonan Vasquez, he had been doing a blog post a day called Invader Zim Facts. And it would start off, each blog post would start off a little sincere and then go off the rails with bizarre humor. And he was drumming up viral attention towards Zim while simultaneously Nicktoons Network was rerunning it as a 1 month only sort of deal. Later on in the year, Jonan did confirm that that month was to test the waters for potential revival, that there were calls with Nickelodeon and it didn't pan out, and he says the reasons were that it's too expensive. I gathered also from other interviews a post that I don't know if it's still on Eric Trueheart's website anymore, that basically Nicktoons wouldn't have the budget to do it in the way Jonan would have wanted. And then Nickelodeon has, this is my words here, this is my interpretation of things. Nickelodeon has to oversee so many business decisions. It isn't just a matter of Invader Zim popular? Yes, no. Invader Zim make us money? Yes, no. Is it a fit for their long-term goals? And that's what I imagine led to them still saying no. I guess the fans really couldn't let it go. I couldn't a little bit. Jonan said it was really cool that fans never let it go in some ways. And that's where my friend Sarah basically rallied the fans on social media and took every opportunity possible to drum up attention on Zim through Nickelodeon. Some ideas more bold than others, but the one that made the biggest impact was a letter writing event at the second Invader Zim convention in California. It started there and it was then global on the internet, this letter writing event called Project Massive. Nobody on the record has confirmed anything. This is just my speculation, but within weeks or a month or so, Nicktoons was able to put on better rerun slots for Zim. We find out years later that while Jonan was pitching a show to Nickelodeon called Very Important House, apparently Nickelodeon was going, "That's great. Let's talk about Zim." So in a way, we won, but the timing was so poor. But in the end, though, I can say with confidence, I haven't spoken to Sarah or a lot of my co-admin in a long time, but we value creator over owner. And when a creator wants to work on other things, we're excited about that. We only wanted to do this because he said he loved the idea of doing more Zim stuff, or at least a special. So when he said, "We're going to make something new." I'm like, awesome. We might love it more, or at least in a different way. And eventually, we still got what we wanted because Oni Press, a year or so after that, acquired the licensing rights, and then some time was taken, and then the comic books came out, and we're like, okay, we definitely won. Another year or two later, unfortunately, very important house didn't pan out, and Jonan, he put it best. Someone said, well, you did it. Invader Zim's back. They said at San Diego Comic Con, and he says, I didn't bring it back. You guys did. And then everyone cheers and goes, no, no, it was me. I'm kidding. I brought it back. It's true, because in the end, it's his decision. You can offer him a low budget experience and he's gonna say no. You could give him an environment that he's not gonna feel support in and he's gonna say no. And I'm paraphrasing that last sentiment, of course, but he finally said yes due to a combination of timing, knowing that they were definitely wanting to work with him instead of him having to pitch something and prove that a new thing should be made. The culture changed within Nickelodeon. The people in charge grew with the company and remembers being peers to the Zim crew back when they were working under the people that didn't understand Zim. You mentioned Pete and Pete earlier, the co-creator Chris Fishardi. He's very supportive of Invader Zim, and you can see it in press releases he contributed to and interview comments he made for the Invader Zim art book. So the fandom was very fortunate to have that change of tides and the availability and a good idea, because Jonan also said he needs to have the right idea to do a movie, and he preferred to do a movie over the series because of the sheer exhaustion involved. And then, as the movie was nearing completion, regimes changed at Nickelodeon again, and as I said, the people supporting it grew with the company, but the people in charge these days, from what I'm gathering, didn't grow with the company, and they seem to be benignly unaware of Zim, that Florpus, Enter the Florpus, was doing well on Rotten Tomatoes with social media responses, with the fan base. When you inherit these new positions, you're going to take risks that you're passionate about, not what your predecessors were passionate about, if you're even aware of what they were doing. So I'm hoping that this 20th anniversary with InvaderCon's stream happening Tuesday night, or perhaps InvaderCon invading Fan Expo Boston, hopefully happening in August, but card is subject to change due to, you know, things. Hopefully Nickelodeon will just say, okay, let's give this intruder Jim or whatever another shot.
I feel the same way when I found out about the Patakis, where I learned that Craig Bartlett wanted to pitch it over to Nickelodeon at the time, and they said, no, this is too dark. For those who don't know about the Pataki spin-off series, that it was supposed to take place years after the show of Hey Arnold ended its run, where Helga was a teenager and she was going through like some angsty personality with Arnold finally moving away, and she writes letters to him every day and never mailing them because she's embarrassed or shy to tell him that she loved him. And so we got to see her family where they're at the brink of divorce, and her sister is a struggling actress, even though that she just finished through college, and it goes through a really depressing note. And he wanted to do it for MTV, but then it was he wanted to do it for Nickelodeon, but then he was like, nah, this is too dark. And this was like a year before Teen Nick came along. Then he decided, oh, I'm going to pitch it to MTV. But then they were like, no, this is too similar to Daria. So it never happened. So yeah, I feel the exact same notions, in which I when I first found out that, oh man, there was going to be more of the show that I love as a kid, but then MTV didn't pick it up because of this reason, it's like, that sucks. Yeah, you mentioning about the management changes definitely correlates to a video that I wrote a year ago called The Pros and Cons of Hey Arnold the Jungle Movie, and then later on I did the aftermath of Hey Arnold the Jungle Movie, where I talked about during the when after that the Jungle Movie was released, then Static Cling and Enter the Florpus were delayed due to Nickelodeon saying, oh, but the 18 to 35-year-old demographic saw it, but none of the kids saw it. So, oh, what are we going to do? Now we're going to post our stuff on Netflix. And they had that huge Netflix multi-year contract. Then after a while, that is when the merger happened with Viacom and CBS, and then that's when Brian Robbins took over as president, and most of the people were being replaced. So yeah, there was a lot of change in structure that happened with the release of Enter the Florpus. And if they would have come out in 2010, it would have been a similar situation because that would have been around like a few years after Sima Saragami had taken over. A lot of the new people came along and they were like saying, okay, we're gonna take this, and we're gonna take this network that has been the number one network for kids in a completely different direction. 2010 would have been the same year that Cartoon Network released Adventure Time, which they canceled 5 times 3 years prior on random cartoons. And then when they saw that it was a hit, they were like, oh crap, what do we do now? So I take it that if they wanted to, step up their game, they needed to bring, Jonan Vasquez and many people who probably would have been huge for Nickelodeon at its previous years to say, hey, we hear that you're working on this project, but let's talk about this Zim. Remember that show that was like really popular at the time, and then we aired it on the Nicktoons network, and people are starting to watch it again. Let's see if we can work around that. And it didn't happen like you said, but yeah, I mean, like, tough deal that all of this stuff was happening around the time in which when Viacom and Nickelodeon were going through like all of these massive structural changes.
Yeah. And also, I gotta say, like, I'm taking off my fandom hat and just talking as a human being. It is so refreshing to hear someone basically confirm everything or like corroborate everything I was reading. You were so on the money with all that timeline stuff, and I was just like, yep, the Viacom CBS merger, yup, everything that was happening with the Netflix buyout and stuff, and oh, and SEMA, yep, I don't have to explain this to people. It's so refreshing that someone knows what I'm talking about already.
Well, I have been on the content creation game for almost a decade, and I'm an analytical geek. Like, I need to research all of this stuff so that I can be right. I mean, there are some times in which I got it wrong, and I do admit it, but I always try to look through article upon article that says, okay, this actually happened, whether it be like from Variety or Deadline or something like that. I don't try to look through Wikipedia unless Wikipedia does actually have the article where they cite it from, and then I'll be like, okay, I can use it. Which is why it takes me a very long time to post videos as opposed to posting podcasts, which I feel like I really need to like get my sources correctly, because I know that there'll be people pointing out, oh, you got this wrong, and I don't want to do that. If I feel like I did something wrong or I need to add something that I missed out on, I will delay it until I get it right. I am just that. I'm just that much of a perfectionist to make sure, okay, the information that I post up, I need to make sure that I research it correctly, that it's coming from the right source, that the interviews are like legitimate. So yeah, I'm actually really thankful for that, because not a lot of people give me compliments saying, wow, you're spot on with your stuff and you got it from the right source. So I thank you for that.
Hey, diligent sees diligent, so I got you. And one of the things that Invader Zim's fan culture could use a nice shot of adrenaline in the arm about is citing our sources. And it's inevitable that a lot of misinformation happens in this fandom because it was marketed to children, and the ones who are most active in online invaders and communities tend to be in high school or middle school, and they have a little bit more free time and less opportunities to put their talents in something offline, like, I don't know, after school clubs maybe. So Invader Zim is usually their entry level into fandom productivity, especially because Invader Zim fandom strongly thrives in fan art and fan fiction, for better and worse. It's usually almost never congruent with canon vibe. The fandom is stronger with having their creativity sparked rather than their organizational skills and informational skills sparked. And I say this also with the utmost respect and admiration. There are some fan resources that are a little behind, that they weren't future proofed. But basically, there was one Invader Zim fan site one of many that I'm friends with, and they've had regime changes themselves because no one can be in fan projects forever. It doesn't pay anything, and we want to have spouses and children and dream jobs and hobbies. But before the comics came out, a lot of fan project people are like, all right, we got the thing we wanted made. Zim probably isn't coming back. Head Pigeons tried, but Jonan's busy, and they didn't future proof. And then when the comics brought in another generation of children having baby's first fandom, and I say that lovingly, we have people making edits to websites that they didn't start, and making edits and providing content to sites that they don't run, and they're doing their best, but the information is woefully inaccurate, and fans will misconstrue their hunch as trivia. I think the more I give examples, I think people are starting to figure out that I mean the Invader ZIM wiki, so I might as well be honest. I love the Invader ZIM wiki. I have friends who worked on it. I've been in touch with some people who are heavily contributing now, and they are doing their best with the free time they have. And because I'm a big believer to not throw stones in a glass house, I co-moderate, I'm the senior moderator of the Invader ZIM subreddit, and for the longest time I was running it alone, and it went to shit for a little while, so I'm not judging anybody. I say with love that if the fans could take some inspiration from someone who used to have that free time, please get organized, cite your sources, and also don't be reliant on social media for your bandwidth, for your finding your audience, because you might have to start making your own websites, and you might have to start getting affiliates from every other project you're in touch with so that you can boost each other up and lift each other up as a community. Fan sites have not been a thing since early 2000s, mid 2000s. I'm sure you remember some of the sites like Bad Bad Rubber Piggy, Scary Monkey Show, Buzzy World's The Amazing Invader Zim site, stuff like that. But we haven't had that era in a while, and without that community that's in touch and citing sources, there's no accountability to misinformation. And that's why we have people saying Bloody Gurr canceled the show.
Oh, yes. I have seen so many pictures and so many posts about Bloody Gurr saying it canceled the show. And let's not forget about the parent petitions. Like, parents complained that their kids were watching something that involved with a dog getting bloody all over the place. And so they wrote to Nickelodeon petitioning the cancellation of this show. Oh, don't think that I haven't heard that.
That's the most ridiculous version of the Bloody Gurr one I've ever heard. A dog gets blood everywhere. That is some beauty of misinformation. I'm glad to hear that one. That's hilarious. That is like the weirdest bastardization of it. I love it.
Amazing. Just 10 out of 10. So, yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the reason on why Invader Zim gets canceled is probably the most infamous when it comes to, like, misinformation. Like, oh, it was canceled because it didn't have any good ratings. It was canceled because of Bloody Gurr. It was canceled because parents complained that their children were watching a show that, alongside with SpongeBob, was like featuring things that were not age appropriate. I've heard a lot of these things. But as you mentioned before, I mean, mostly due to the fact that it was like running over budget. I mean, it was a really expensive show to produce. Nickelodeon felt that it wasn't worth to have. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I don't understand why out of all the shows that have ever been, like, canceled for Nickelodeon, like, I mean, Cat Scratch only ran for like 26 episodes. I think the X's ran for a similar amount, but you don't hear like, oh, deep elaborate stories and why they got canceled. But no, Invader Zim, it's like, yeah, we gotta go into creepypasta and find out what the real story is.
Yeah, Zim has that edgy environment going for it, and the edgy fans are going to be the ones having an edgy imagination. I will say about the cancellation, ratings and sheer expense is as comfortable a target as Jonan was willing to provide for one of his blog posts. He said, "Even I can't tell you the full truth." I'm paraphrasing slightly. I've been quoting this line for a decade, and I think I got it verbatim. But he said something to the effect of, "Even I couldn't tell you the full truth of why Invader Zim was canceled. All I could say was that the most likely culprits were ratings and sheer expense." With that quote established, I also think of what Eric Trueheart said in his book. And for those unaware, Eric Trueheart is, while not the head writer of the animated series, that was Frank Conniff from Mystery Science Theater, and while not the creator, he has written more Invader Zim stories than anyone on the crew, partly due to the comics, and he's basically like Jonan's right-hand man when it comes to the writing these days. And Eric's take was that while 9/11 didn't cancel Zim, here we go. I'm hyping this up. You know where this is going.
Oh, oh man. Oh goody. Yeah, the same complaints I hear about Constant Pain, the pilot from Nickelodeon, around 2001, where it's like, oh, they canceled it because a blimp just went to a few buildings and that would like trigger memories of 9/11. That's not the reason why it got canceled. It was because of union strikes.
So, like, while people were so close with going, oh, 9/11, and people are offended, so they got rid of it, maybe that was a little factor. Maybe that added to the pile. But here's what Eric wrote, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but he basically said, and this is in my own words, that 9/11 happened, and then this had an impact on the economy, like a little dip, and then Viacom's stock lowered a bit, and due to that, apparently Sumner Redstone, the owner of National Amusements, which owns Viacom CBS, he ordered a company-wide budget cut from every branch of the entire company. Even if you were a cash cow, you had to make some cuts. So of course, Invader Zim was technically, even just by 5%, the most expensive. It wasn't pulling in the target demographics ratings. And I would go so far as to say is because it was originally developed to pull in the audience that it pulled in instead of Nickelodeon's main demographic, it's just unfortunate that it didn't turn out to be the fit it needed because it should have been flanked with other stuff. But back to what Eric said, the ratings, not with a target demographic, and the expenses kind of made it, my words here, a no-brainer. An unfortunate no-brainer, but it's a lot more of a boring reason than Bloody Gerd or angry Christian parents, or actually my favorite variation of the Bloody Gerd legends is people try to psychoanalyze it and they go, it traumatized children due to subliminal imaging. Dude, it was a Fight Club joke. There has never been, to my knowledge, any scientific literature within 3 years of 2001 or 3 years of now, because you always have to check for the cyclical nature of scientific research. I don't believe there's anything of substance in any scientific study that would establish Bloody Gur being psychologically damaging for being drawn into one frame. But you know what? I guess this means neither is Tyler Durden's penis, so there you go. We can edit that out if you need.
Oh no, 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 that's fine. I don't really care. It's like I don't know what that reference is, but sure.
Bloody Gur was a reference to Fight Club, and Fight Club was a big deal back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there's a thing where Brad Pitt is playing this character that one of his many jobs is film projectionist, and he splices in pornographic images into children's films. So Bloody Gur was drawn, and as a joke, maybe they weren't thinking of Fight Club, but they're like, we could slip it into the frames. And you know what? They probably were thinking of Fight Club because in Rise of Zit Boy, Gaz is reading a book that says Punch Club. So yeah, safe to say it was on their mind. But I'm not crew, so don't take my word for it too much.
Ah, gotcha.
Oh yeah, and then just some fans just, oh, they turn it into a game of telephone. But I've went into that too much.
Nah, that's all right. I mean, even with fandom, and even if you do know some things here and there, there's always room for speculation. But yeah, I think that with that out of the way, I guess we can start talking about like how the fandom grew over the course of these many years, because it's like you were saying in terms of, like around maybe like the late 2000s or the 2010s is when the fandom really started to culminate into what we kind of have now with like the fan conventions, InvaderCon, and then Soapy Waffles did the animation for Mopiness of Doom, and then eventually we had the comics, and then finally we have Enter the Florpus. So I am more familiar with like the fandom for Hey Arnold because that's where, I'm more leaning towards. But Invader Zim, I'm not. So I'll let you take over for this one.
So the fan sites were a little bit of a wild west. Back then, if you wanted to have an Invader Zim anything, you had to know what you were doing and have a little bit of coding skills. Dear friend of mine in the fandom had made one of the, what I think is the only Invader Zim fan site that doesn't require going to Internet Archives to see. Buzzy Worlds, the Amazing Invader Zim site. Apparently, he borrowed the code from WeirdAl.com from back in the early 2000s. Invader Zim fandom, in terms of fostering an online community, really required people to step up and have knowledgeable skills. These days, anyone and their mom can make a Facebook page, a Facebook group, or a Discord server, and they're about a dime a dozen, and you don't know when you step into the first one you hear of whether it's going to be a fit. So the upside is everyone has opportunity, everyone has a chance to create, to connect, but there is a noise to signal ratio, and it's almost like fan services and fan communities sometimes are going to feel like a secret by accident because you go on Facebook and there's 20 of each, and you have to go find out, all right, who moderates these really well? Do they have a firm grip on troll prevention? Do they operate in a sense of compassion, or are they big on bluntly kicking people out? Do they ostracize you for being awkward, or they help you grow through your awkwardness? I'm really big on the fan servers that give opportunities for people to be their best self instead of going, oh my God, shut up, and ban, or make fun of them so hard until they leave. There have been forums like that in the Invader Zim community in the early days. What I'm loving is that everyone has an opportunity to try to start their own little pockets of communities. And I think if we could take one page out of the original generation of Zim fans book, is start linking to each other more often instead of just putting it on YouTube, putting up a hashtag and hoping people see it. People should reach out and say, do you want to be affiliates? My server is really big on roleplay. Oh, well, my server is really big on archival information. Well, my server is really big on fan art. Well, we can't all cover all of these things on our own, so when people want different things, they can go to different servers. I think that's the key. It could be like some sort of Invader Zim Discord super community if you go with that approach. Another reflection off the top of my head about the evolution of the fandom was that different generations, like the 2000 early 2000 generation and the early 2010s generation, were really big on having their voices heard. Early 2000s generation, with their fan sites, their fan fiction, the web petition, fan art, convention cosplay, back when cosplay wasn't a major mainstream media hobby, that got the attention not of Nickelodeon, but licensed vendors. Media Blasters had an art designer named Meredith Mulroney. If I remember this accurately, I believe it was her that was an avid fan, and so was CEO John Cirabello. Tells me he watched it with his daughter. And Meredith may have been the one to say, well, a lot of anime enthusiasts who we market to already love Invader Zim. So they went out of their comfort zone, out of the anime market, and then turned to Nickelodeon and said, let's make an Invader Zim DVD. And you can imagine that it was a surprise to Nickelodeon, that it's just not on their radar to market to fandom. Of course, Nickelodeon was on board for it. And then meanwhile, Palisades Toys was shooting their shot for action figures at the same time, and all they had to do, these companies just had to say, look at these fan sites, look at this fan art amount on DeviantArt, look at how much fan fiction on fanfiction.net. And Nickelodeon probably started to figure out that their business model, I presume, may have started to expand and change after they realized that you can't just market to the casual audience children when your show is failing, that you still have a last-ditch effort to market to young fans who are a little bit more misfit, a little bit more shut up and take my money about nerd stuff.
It almost reminded me a little bit of the fandom from Hey Arnold, in which you had like the late 90s, early 2000s generation, and then you had the 2010s generation, in which ever since they heard about the Jungle movie, they had like these fan sites like GeraldField.com and various other sites where they would try to convince Nickelodeon to do this movie. And then eventually, around the 2010s, when you had Operation Ruthless and the Hey Arnold Facebook page, in which they took it into a much more further level to get what they wanted. And then eventually we had like more of the fanfics and the fan arts where they were talking about like their interpretations on how they feel that the series ended. So yeah, I think that that's actually pretty interesting. Where even though that these are two completely different shows, the fandoms just sound so similar.
Yeah, Hey Arnold, I have a lot of fond memories of it, and one of my best friends in the world adores Hey Arnold. And while he's not in the deep online community aspect of Hey Arnold fandom, I guarantee he must have heard of at least one of those things. And when he hears this interview, he'll be like, "Oh yeah, you can learn a lot about fandom from the Hey Arnold Empire." Shout outs to you, Steve. I hope you get a laugh at that. So there was actual, what was the operation thing you just mentioned? What was that called again? Operation Ruthless?
Yeah, Project Operation Ruthless. Operation Ruthless was the name of an episode from season one.
And what was their goal?
Their goal was to convince Nickelodeon to greenlight the Jungle movie.
Okay, so I love how the early 2010s, everyone's fan project movements had Operation in it. It was like a meme in itself. We had Operation Head Pigeons for Zim, Project Operation Ruthless, and immediately I think of Operation Rainfall, which was Nintendo fans advocating to get localized versions of what was it? Why am I forgetting? Xenoblade Chronicles. Now Operation Starfall for Geno fans who whether they want Geno in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate because Sakurai wanted Geno in, but I digress. Or they just want a Super Mario RPG revival at all. I love that everyone keeps going with, well, you got to call it Operation. It's like a hive mind of the fandom experience for that generation.
We need to overemphasize how important it is. It's a mission.
Yes, it's a movement. I'm very cautious about how I described Operation Head Pigeons over the years, for instance, where I would call it a campaign or a movement, a revival mission. Some of us were very deeply resonating with the community feel to our active members participating in our Facebook pages. I remember one of our biggest feathers in our cap was how a company now known as For Fans by Fans, but they were known at the time as We Love Fine or Mighty Fine Inc. They offered for us to be official guest judges of the first official Invader ZIM tea design contest. And to anyone who's stalking my content, they'll be like, "Oh, here he goes again with that story. Oh, will you ever let that go about how proud you were?" Well, wouldn't you be? But we were gently encouraged to not call ourselves a revival movement or what our goal was when we had to come up with a description for the press release. And it wasn't at Mighty Fine's needs, it was at Nickelodeon's because we're not licensed and we're not like an official thing. And if Nickelodeon's gonna license them to license us to be guest judges, that would mean Nickelodeon saying yes to the people wanting Zim back, and they're not necessarily convinced yet. So I'm like, okay, we can see that, and we were like, all right, what do we call ourselves? Fan group, online community. We're like, we're not really these things, and people are gonna think we're a fan club, but community. 6 seasons in a movie. Yeah. But that was a fun time. We guest judged it where we got to pick a prize. Like it wasn't the number one prize, but the design we went for was the one where there was like a standoff of Zim aiming a laser at Dib aiming a water gun, and I was and Gaz are chilling in their respective corners, like playing games or eating. It was cute. But that brings me to my point about what the second generation, as I call it, was like, where social media dominated the Invader Zim fanscape instead of forums. But as you have the subreddit and all these discords, and back then in early 2010s, Facebook groups everywhere, and the advocacy came back only because Jonan sparked our passion by saying, quote, "I loved the idea of doing more Zim stuff," unquote. And it was all about trying to find any voice we could have in the fandom, and whether it was just being as visible as possible with our passion at InvaderCon, whether it was fan projects like Soapy Waffles, shout outs to them. Great, talented people, and these days I don't think we can replicate the awesomeness of Soapy Waffles, nor do we need to. Now I'm seeing there are what I believe is called Invader ZIM multi-animator projects. They call them MAP for short. And as a millennial, where that acronym has a darker context, I hear Invader ZIM MAP. I'm like, what? But I digress. We can probably edit that out.
No, it's okay. We're good.
I'm loving that while I'm not really personally, as a fan, interested in fan creativity if it's not congruent with canon, I'm more interested in information. I'm more interested in bringing canon to life, like Soapy Waffles did with the unfinished episode. The multi-animator project marries the best of those both worlds. They're taking the unfinished audio or the InvaderCon script readings, and they're going to animate it, but they're going to make sure that they do it in their own art styles so that they can celebrate their own take on things. I think Jonan probably appreciates that just as much, where you can take his ideas and do something transformative and new with it. And that's beautiful to me.
Oh, absolutely. And I actually wanted to thank Eric Trueheart of hooking me up with you and the connections, because I was able to start writing my script on Media Hall of Fame, 4 stories on how the fans got integral into their favorite animated shows. And I was asking you about the fan commentary and all that stuff that you were saying about, like, the fans made a canon. I was even mentioning about this with, like, all the fans who were able to, like, put in their hard work because of something that they love so much, and making it that it is part of the canon itself, like the 2 guys who animated the last episode of Dungeons and Dragons that we never got, or Half Shy, who was a huge Adventure Time fan, and she wrote 2 fan songs, and then Adamuto, the showrunner, was like, wow, I like your stuff, can you write a song for the actual special? And she was like, yes. And, even with the show, how it influenced the animation community so much, and even, like, the actual industry. Like, I know that people are going to be saying, why didn't you mention this earlier? But, hey, okay, I'm going to mention this now, because a lot of people are going to be saying that in the comments that, yes, Rebecca Sugar, the creator of Steven Universe, was a huge Invader ZIM fan. You can go check out her fanfics online of all the stuff that she used to write, and Peridot was heavily inspired by ZIM himself, so... There, I hope you're happy now.
I'm actually glad to hear that, and this is probably too petty a story, but since this is a very casual interview, instead of like me shamelessly plugging events or anything, I'm going to tell you this fun bonus story. I was on an online dating app on New Year's Eve, and just rummaging through it while I had some downtime after the ball dropped, and my opener usually, because animation taste can say something about who we are, where we've been, where we're going. And it's a nice icebreaker. So I go, all right, what was your favorite animated show, even if you haven't watched one in ages, and why? And this person said Steven Universe, and I believe she said something about empathy or something. And I said Invader Zim, and I said it was a bit avant-garde for its time, and then I noticed she went to CalArts, apparently, if I recall correctly, but apparently not animation. And she goes, who watches Invader Zim? And I'm just like, dude, you wouldn't like it if someone was shitting on your tastes right now. You're 27, who watches Invader Zim? And I'm just like, you know what, I could say a lot more about this, and I appreciate the honesty, but it needs to be tempered with empathy. Good luck, hope you find what you're looking for. And then months later, I found out Rebecca Sugar's an avid Zim fan, and I could have said, gee, where do you think Peridot comes from?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the fact that she's green, that she doesn't know how to activate human inventions, and then she calls them something really strange. She calls everybody clods. I mean, come on. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And if you read some of the stuff that she wrote down on her fanfics, it's like she clearly knows about the characters and the stories that they would write in Invader Zim. And I think she even did the foreword for the art book, I think.
She did.
Yeah, so that goes to show you that, yeah, this show made a huge impact on her. So I'm glad that Rebecca was able to pull off just that little inspiration for Zim in the form of a character that has become a fan favorite. So, go, actually, I'm going to link it in the description below, but seriously, go check out the fanfics that Rebecca wrote when they were 15. It's a scream, and I don't read fanfics very often, but it's actually pretty funny. So, and her description, where Rebecca was describing about the profile, it's like, um, "Hi, my name is Rebecca Sugar. I'm 15 years old. I'm a comic artist slash stop motion animator. I made two little bad movies, and someday I'll make a good one. At the moment, comics are my passion. I've made my first comic on my freshman year of high school called All Your Base. Aw, that's so cute. Naming that after a meme from a video game from the Sega Genesis that not a lot of people even played. And then Rebecca just goes more into how they called Jonah Vasquez their Lord and Savior. It's like, okay.
That was some common stan behavior back then. It was almost like a meme in itself. It's adorable.
Yeah, here's the disclaimer. This stuff's not mine. The story is, but this stuff's not mine. All that good stuff belongs to my Lord and Slave Master, Jonan Vasquez. Where would my life be without you, JV? It would be frighteningly Zimless. That is so cute.
I love it.
Shout outs to you, Rebecca, and for all the people who are out there, you can make you can make your dreams a reality. You'll have a huge hit on Cartoon Network. Anyway, let's just get back on track. So, yeah, I guess we can give like a few final discussions right before we go. So, comics and Enter the Florpus. What are your thoughts on them?
I loved them. Besides the fact that I spent a couple of years with Head Pigeons letting it kind of define me a little bit offline. Like, my friends in college are like, Johnny's the Zim guy. I'm like, I'm one of like a dozen Zim people right now. They got to take credit too. But here, yeah, I'm the Zim guy. And then when Very Important House was pitched, I was like, well, we won, but at in a bittersweet way. And now I'm looking forward to what Jonan's doing otherwise, or at least it appears like we won. So once they announced the comics, I had reached out to our founder, Sarah, reached out to her grandparents because I met her grandfather at a convention. I just said, hi, hope Sarah's doing well. If you could just deliver a message for me. We won. I left that on the voicemail, and her grandmother called back and said, I felt chills from that. I'm like, oh, yay. Tell her I said hi. But, it was, I don't want to say vindication, but like sweet relief because I would have been happy to just say, well, we tried and it didn't work out and we were confident. Even if Jonan turned around and said, I don't want to do it anymore, that would have been fine too, because Stan, the creators, not the owners. But I would have even been happy if the comics sucked, because I wanted the creators to be able to have a say, to have the door just left open. And thankfully, the comics were amazing. Whether it was the first 5 or 10 issues that the alumni of the Zim crew were working on, or the stuff that was a little bit more in line with Jonan's original idea. I had seen a Q&A panel, I think it was at Kamikaze Con 2012, where he said that there were Zim comic book talks that, essentially, my words here, didn't pan out. And he wanted it to be, once again, my words here, a little more anthological. The Zim writers would come back, if I understood him right, and he had artist friends he would have wanted to do their own take. And so the comics, after the first 10 issues, started to lean a little bit more into that. And I felt that was really cool. That Zim doesn't have to be what we remember. Like, so many animation fans know that the first season, long-held series, shouldn't define the show. But because Zim didn't last very long, the very best animation quality was season two's few episodes that were not rushed out, such as Backseat Drivers from Beyond the Stars. I presume the others were rushed out. Some of the crew weren't proud of the final results. I don't know. I can't speak to that. I could be confabulating a memory. But seeing the comics come out, and every once in a while it's something that feels exactly like the original art style, or seeing them take it in new directions, was beautiful. This may not be news to everyone, but The Invader Zim comics are ending, and I don't just mean the monthly issues. The quarterlies are ending as well. They are co-written by Jonan and Eric, and they are being drawn by Aaron Alexovich as of this recording, and it was confirmed on Jonan's Twitch stream. I believe we only have one issue left, and it seems, if I'm understanding, and with the limited information I have, I would hope that this is because Jonan is ending it on his terms. Whether he's just not interested anymore, or he told all the stories there is to tell, or I don't know. If he has a reason to tell us about, I look forward to hearing it one day. And I will cite it to death when I have to dispel rumors. And then Florpus. Florpus, I nearly cried 3 times. And it felt like the same magic of reading issue 1 and 2, especially issue 1, because Invader Zim fans know that the first act of Enter the Florpus heavily draws upon the first issue of Invader Zim, because prior to the comics, Jonan already had this idea. He was telling at InvaderCon that Zim would be hiding in a toilet, or maybe he even said a tub at that time, or I just remember a tub. Maybe he was toying around with it. I'll have to go rewatch the footage. But he wanted to tell that story, and I guess he wanted to make sure he told it in both those formats. And one of the things that really gets me is the Pieces Nice song, because I am meeting very young fans, like friends who have had kids, and they show Invader Zim to their very young children, and they are singing Pieces Nice. My friend Ray had invited me to her baby shower, and I met this young boy named Link, who he's nonverbal autistic, and he went up on his seat and started swaying left and right with his hands outstretched, going bleep bloop bloop, bleep bloop bloop. And I'm just like, peace is nice. And he gets all excited at the chicken and rice part, and I'm like, this is why fans wanted it back. A new generation deserved to know the wonder and magic that we felt. Like, people were thinking it was adults wanting it back because they can't let something go. I had my memories. I'm satisfied with my 27 episodes. It was a good time as a kid. But when you have crew that are interested in doing it again, and they are, I should end on this note, I guess, but at Comic Con at home last year, Eric and Aaron made remarks during a panel that it's up to the fans to save Zim again, that Nickelodeon's not aware of Zim. And some people, when I try to tell them that, they go, I don't know if Jonan wants to do it anymore. And then I cite a few more articles where he didn't say, I'd love to do it, do more Zim stuff like he said in 2010, but he said he was open to it. He has people in mind to handle the more exhausting parts of the process, names that were not on record, as you'll see if you look up those articles. And he said that at one point, and remember, his mind can change, that he said that he doesn't know. Like, if you could just push a button and you get the same crew, the same support from the network, he'd be open to doing it again. But he's also wondering what he can do if he's just writing and has the time to work on other awesome things I would love to see. You can tell I went from paraphrasing him to just injecting my I would love to see feeling there. I I don't think fan letters will work this time. The It's been a decade since Project Massive, and that was right on the tail end of fan letters still working as a thing that revives the show. And it's a lesson I've had to learn the hard way in the past couple of years, that networks have become weary of it, and especially if you send letters with stuff, they will just throw it out immediately. Thankfully, we were ahead of that game in 2012 with Project Massive. Instead of sending it with stuff, which is supposed to be eye-catching, we didn't need to. We had someone on the inside at Nickelodeon, thanks to some connections, someone was willing to collect them if we mailed them to her. Her name was Caitlin Bolich. Instead of sending stuff, we had instead sold vouchers. You donate money to Toys of Hope charity, a charity that Nickelodeon was fond of that was nearby them in New York. And if you make these donations, you'll get more eye-catching envelopes from the convention panel we had, and a voucher inside saying we donated to Toys of Hope charity in Nickelodeon's name. So I don't know what the fans should do this time. I would just say if they're listening, you need to politely but firmly and organized in an organized manner get the attention of the execs, but you might have to be creative about it. Maybe you have to send them a whole bunch of art. Maybe someone should gently bring a binder full of fan art. That was an idea one person had in the Geno fan base for Super Smash Brothers. They brought Geno fan art to Nintendo of Japan. Maybe someone who has the charm and skill to talk to people and not look like a psychopath should try that. Like a big binder of fan art saying, "Please for the children." I don't know.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's definitely a great way to end things off, considering that, yeah, we do have hope for the new generation. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on by. I really do appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. I had a really fun time hanging out and talking with you.
Absolutely. So I know that you already talked about where people can find you at, but for those who probably missed out on it, yeah, where can people find you at?
Well, my Twitter handle for Operation Head Pigeons Matters is at OP Head Pigeons, and you can also find me hanging out at the Wasabi Anime Discord server. Wasabi Anime is the company that runs InvaderCon, and the InvaderCon owners and staff were gracious enough to challenge me with handling the weekly Invader ZIM episode discussions. So if you enjoyed hearing what I have to say, well, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. We're going to take turns talking. I keep it simple. I ask things like, what was your favorite part? What trivia did you notice? And sometimes we just have fun quoting, and then some points in the night we start getting a little deep and analytical. Looking forward to having you there. And of course, I would love to do a panel at InvaderCon Invades Fan Expo Boston if that's happening this year. Knock on wood, about herd immunity and the progress of science.
All right. And as for me, you can find me on youtube.com/oldschoollane, facebook.com/oldschoollane. I'm on Twitter at patty_b_Miranda. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Radio Public, all those places. New episodes of Casual Chats and Old School Lane interviews go there first, and then they'll go up a few days on YouTube. So that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let us know in the comments below about how you first got introduced to Invader ZIM. What were your favorite episodes, favorite moments, favorite characters? What are your thoughts of the movie? Even though I know that we talked about it in Enter the Florpus a few years ago, but still, just remind me, what are your thoughts on the fandom? Are you actually part of them? And let me know how. So yeah, that's it. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.